I think we have to talk about immigration again, don't we? This issue has quickly taken over the airwaves as more and more protests are taking place around the country, and the issue is fast becoming an election issue. Will it overtake housing as the number one issue for most voters? I personally don't think so, as housing is such a huge issue with wide-ranging implications and causes, chief among them pure greed, but immigration is certainly to the forefront of voters' minds, as a recent poll from the Sunday Independent shows, and has now joined the cost of living and healthcare as one of the top 4 issues behind housing in the minds of the electorate. While the opposition to our immigration policies has been felt throughout 2023, it was generally brushed aside as merely a machination of the far right and nothing more, and no quarter was given to the idea that there may actually be genuine community concerns at the heart of the protests, despite the Red C poll results showing 75% of people think we've taken in too many migrants. Fast forward to November and the stabbing of very young children in broad daylight on the streets of Dublin, and the riot that followed that same day forced the issue into the mainstream, and questions were asked about the robustness of the asylum process here in Ireland and whether it is fit for purpose. Now I'm going to make a segue here to talk about something that has been bothering me more and more since the riot in November, and that is the fact that in most media articles, news reports, and when politicians speak about that night in November, they invariably refer to it as the night of the Dublin riots. Riots. Not riots singular, but riots plural. This bothers me because the older I get, the more I have begun to appreciate language and its nuances and uses. To paraphrase a famous wizard, words are our most inexhaustible source of magic, capable of both inflicting injury and remedying it. And when I hear our politicians and our media talk, especially about divisive issues that they'd rather we all shut up about, and I'm not just talking about immigration here, I can't help but get annoyed at the language that they use to further their own aims. The so-called riots are a case in point. There was one riot on one night in one location after one of the most public and horrific acts of violence on the most innocent in our society that we have seen in this country. The reaction sparked one riot on one night in one location. It's subtle, but using the plural riots seeks to amplify the aftermath and make it seem like far more than it was. Do I condone the vandalism, looting and carnage that we saw that night? Absolutely not, but there's no need to exaggerate it and embellish it either. There was one riot on one night in one location. That's it. So why are the politicians and media so keen to exaggerate and say riots? Well, in the case of the media, I'd wager it's mostly just the usual sensationalism to garner clicks and views. But why are politicians also saying it? Well, because it furthers their aims. Or at least they think it can. In the immediate aftermath, there were calls from both Leo Varadkar and Helen McEntee for the hate speech bill to be pushed through and for the use of facial recognition technology. Now, considering some of the alleged instigators of the violence witnessed that night were investigated under current incitement to hatred laws, and there were also many arrests of the alleged actual perpetrators, I'm unsure why Varadkar singled out the new and divisive hate speech bill other than opportunism. I can at least understand McEntee's push for facial recognition technology in the aftermath, even if I disagree with it, but at least that makes some sense. But the hate speech bill? That to me is merely shoehorning an unpopular bill into this story. Unless, of course, they are going to add being a form of public transport or being a retailer to the list of protected characteristics. Now, I would say that I'm being knowingly facetious here, and that Varadkar bringing up the hate speech bill was more to do with the incitement to violence aspect, but, well, he didn't say that. He did eventually remember the incitement to violence part, but his focus was on hatred. You know, that thing that we can't define in law for some reason. Getting back to the topic of immigration, the language used in the public discourse by the media and by politicians is also carefully chosen to obfuscate the truth and gaslight those objecting to our current policies. The far-right label, for example, has been used with abandon to smear anyone who questions immigration policy, to the point that the words are losing all meaning. We constantly hear the conflation of regular migration and irregular migration, of legal immigrants and illegal immigrants. We are asked emotionally loaded questions regarding our health service and the many foreign-born doctors and nurses who are helping to keep the creaking behemoth that is the HSE ticking over. Politicians try to draw our focus to these individuals when really most people don't have any issue with controlled legal immigration to plug skills shortages in our workforce. But they want to conflate these two separate issues to muddy the waters and try to make it appear that anyone who opposes our current approach to illegal and irregular immigration is a bit dim for not seeing the benefits to our healthcare system and is therefore nothing more than a racist shouting at the clouds. Now, I'd also like to make a quick observation here about the usual argument about our healthcare system needing foreign doctors and nurses. Maybe our healthcare system wouldn't be so reliant on foreign staff if we, looked after our own doctors and nurses better. With better wages and conditions that reflect the economic realities of Ireland at present. Because it seems to me that our own are emigrating to be treated better, to be paid better, and to have a better shot at a better life. And yet our solution is not to improve paying conditions, but instead it is to drain the brains of other less well-off countries to get them to do the work that doesn't pay well enough for our own, or, in other words, to exploit them. And really, that logic can be extended to any sector. But maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm on my own in thinking that way. But yeah, language is carefully used opportunistically to conflate issues and gaslight dissenters. It can also be used to punch down, and no, I'm actually not talking about Leo Varadkar for once. No, this time it's Minister for Social Protection Heather Humphreys, who has taken a pop at protesters, wondering how they can protest during the day when most are at work. I mean, there's nothing subtle about that language now, is there? This is the same Heather Humphreys, by the way, who told the ditch to f*** off and leave me alone because they dared to ask her why the rules don't apply to her when it comes to seeking planning permission for using 2 derelict residential properties she owns as office storage. Curious though, how a Minister for Social Protection, which covers pensioners and part-time workers for example, can't understand how some people can be home during the day, nor has she heard of shift workers apparently. No, she'd rather take a pot shot at the unemployed. It would appear that in her worldview, the peasantry shouldn't be allowed an opinion, and definitely not allowed to protest based on that opinion. We can always count on Fine Gael for a good dollop of classism, can't we? Another defence of our current immigration policies is that sure, the Irish people emigrate all the time. And while this may be true, those in government who parrot this line seem to be oblivious to the fact that their poor governance is a big reason why people leave Ireland. But yeah, okay, the Irish emigrate. And they emigrate legally for the most part with the required documentation and approvals and work to support themselves. So the language again seeks to conflate regular and irregular immigration. But what of those so-called undocumented Irish? Well, yet again, language is being used very carefully here. The media will say undocumented, and the attempt is made to pull on the heartstrings, to try to elicit empathy. And naturally, parallels are drawn between the undocumented Irish abroad and those entering Ireland without documentation. The problem with this is that if you remove the emotive language, what you're left with is not undocumented Irish, but the far more accurate, illegal Irish. And quite frankly, if another country wants to send Irish illegals back to Ireland, then that is their right, and I have zero issue with that. In my view, if you break a law in a foreign country, you should expect to be given the boot back home. And arriving illegally or overstaying your legal welcome is very much breaking the law. Then we have the language of lies and misinformation, namely the lies that are spun to try to keep the public from getting too annoyed at the government. Recently, we've heard of plans to buy a new hotel for the residents of Rosscree after the only hotel in the town is to be used for housing migrants. I mean, who on earth believes this pie-in-the-sky proposal? Now, you never know, stranger things have happened and all that, but I'll believe it when I see it. Other lies include how the lifting of the ban on the use of former nursing homes will not lead to more closures and an exodus from that sector, so that the properties can be used for the far more profitable refugee accommodation. Or how about how student accommodation won't be used, yet the government are eyeing up a student complex in Cork to house asylum seekers. Oh, but don't worry, they'll accommodate the students elsewhere. Right. And don't forget the whole extra nurses and Gardaí for the 10 areas that are taking in the most migrants. Yep, I for one wholeheartedly believe that the magic nurse and Garda tree will bear the fruits needed and in the quantities needed for that whopper to be realised. All just lies, in my opinion, quick, easy lies to tell to buy themselves some more time while hoping the people forget. It's pathetic. But how can we talk about language without talking about our glorious leader, Leo Varadkar? The man who just can't help but say the wrong thing. The man whose leadership strategy is to punch down and to gaslight. Well, of course he was at it again, wasn't he? First with his letter to the Independent where he conflated regular and irregular migration as I just spoke about, but where he also claimed that when it comes to deportation orders that, quote, if they do not leave voluntarily, this is forcibly done. He went on to say that nearly 1,000 deportation orders were issued last year, the highest ever, he said. But have a guess at just how many of those highest ever deportation orders were enforced last year. 80. Just 80. So, Leo lying? Leo conflating issues to muddy the waters? Leo misinforming the public? Leo gaslighting? Well, I never. But it doesn't stop there. At a media briefing in December, Leo took aim at, in his words, a far-right myth. Namely, that asylum seekers must claim asylum in the first safe country they enter.
But the level of misinformation is very worrying, and no opinion is allowed. Misinformation, in my view. I even heard on the radio this morning, people saying that asylum seekers have to claim asylum in the first safe country they enter. Like, that is a far-right myth that is being perpetrated broadly.
Now, yes, there are technicalities whereby a person may claim asylum in a different country if, for example, their family have already been granted asylum there, or if they managed getting through to another country without being stopped by officials in any other country along the way. But here's what the current Dublin 3 regulation says. Where it is established that an applicant has irregularly crossed the border into a member state by land, sea or air, having come from a third country, the member state thus entered shall be responsible for examining the application for international protection. So perhaps Leo is right, and I'm merely reading the actual regulations incorrectly. Perhaps what is on screen right now doesn't mean what I think it means. Perhaps there are far more technicalities at play here. I am, after all, a mere YouTuber who does not have expertise in this area. It is odd that other mainstream news media would come to the same conclusions, though, and not be corrected. But let's ignore whether Leo Varadkar is right or wrong on this so-called myth. In fact, let's assume he is right. In that clip, I do not see a true leader who seeks to unify the people and bring people together. A true and proper leader would treat a real far-right myth in a serious manner, in a way that explains and sets the record straight without casting any aspersions on those who may have been taken in by the lie. A good leader can do that. But that's not what I see here in this clip. What I see here is a smug, self-satisfied man who is amused at how wrong everyone else is and how smart he is to be the only one to fully understand the Dublin regulation. That's what I see. I see an arrogant man who would rather sneer at what he sees as a silly far-right myth. A myth that has been widely accepted even in international media circles, I might add, rather than take that time to explain it in a way that doesn't talk down to the electorate, that doesn't find it hilarious that so many have been taken in by the obvious lie, that doesn't condescend, that doesn't patronise. But no, that's not how Leo Varadkar operates, is it? Just check out some of my other videos for more examples. The language of Leo Varadkar is always, it seems to me anyway, to divide, to sow discourse, to play to his own circle and voter base, to patronise and to gaslight. Whatever way you slice it, the language of immigration needs to change if we are to have a proper, reasoned debate on the issue. But then, it suits the current government to continue with the damaging language they currently employ, doesn't it? So what do you think? Have you noticed the same tricks and wordplay to avoid the issues? Are you sick of the patronising language used by our government? Or am I simply seeing, or rather hearing, things? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified of new content. If you want to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee or a super thanks, which is greatly appreciated, and a huge thank you to those of you that already have. You can also follow me on Twitter. Until next time, slán go fóill.